King Charles is allegedly holding hundreds of millions in private royal assets that legally, rightfully, and provably belong to the one brother everyone assumed was simply too timid to ever fight back. According to explosive new legal claims, a staggering cache of inherited wealth and property rights from the late Queen has been quietly absorbed by the new monarch. But the palace just made a catastrophic miscalculation, because they apparently forgot to read the fine print of their own history. You see, an unprecedented inheritance crisis is unfolding right now behind the towering iron gates of Buckingham Palace, and it is built on a secret so carefully buried that it is taking an army of elite property lawyers to dig it up. The British royal family has historically survived abdications, spectacular divorces, and tabloid storms that would have completely leveled any normal dynasty. But what Prince Edward's legal team has reportedly just confirmed in writing might actually be the most consequential internal royal inheritance dispute in modern living memory. And trust me, the palace is absolutely seething about it. This is definitely not the narrative they wanted the public to see, largely because it involves sealed wills, ancient letters patent, sprawling private estates worth hundreds of millions of pounds, and a younger brother who, for the absolute first time in his very careful, very quiet life, appears to have firmly decided that the rigid letter of the law matters significantly more than keeping the peace at the family dinner table. But why is this happening right now? And what exactly did Edward's lawyers find hidden in the archives that has the king's own legal team scrambling in the dark? To properly understand this emerging constitutional nightmare, we have to look closely at the man standing quietly at the center of the storm, because Prince Edward has spent his entire public existence being deliberately, almost aggressively easy for the public to overlook. As the youngest son of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, he grew up entirely in the immense, overpowering shadow of his older siblings, King Charles, Princess Anne, and the perpetually controversial Prince Andrew. While his brothers consistently generated massive international headlines, Edward generated almost none, preferring to build a modest television production company, marry Sophie Rhys-Jones in 1999, and carry out his royal duties without complaint, without scandal, and crucially, without the kind of operatic personal drama that has so heavily defined so many other prominent members of his famous family. For decades, the global press wrote about Edward only when they literally had absolutely nothing better to cover, branding him in the rather unkind language of high society royal commentary as the forgettable one. But in my personal opinion, that carefully curated reputation for quiet, unassuming reliability is precisely what makes his current legal offensive so incredibly dangerous to the status quo. Because the title Prince Edward currently holds, the Duke of Edinburgh, is not simply a nice ceremonial flourish or an empty ribbon to pin on a tailored suit. It carries with it a deeply complex, historically entrenched web of entitlements, land rights, and staggering inheritance provisions that were actually written into ironclad law and royal letters patent long before King Charles III ever sat on the throne. When Queen Elizabeth passed away in September of 2022, it instantly triggered the single largest transfer of royal titles, land, and assets in multiple generations. But something very specific and highly controversial happened to those particular Edinburgh entitlements. According to well-placed sources reportedly familiar with the incredibly sensitive matter, Edward's legal team has spent the better part of the past year conducting a truly meticulous, fine-tooth comb review of the specific letters patent, the complex trust documents, and the airtight succession provisions governing several key royal estates and highly lucrative financial interests. These are the exact same massive interests that King Charles reportedly moved incredibly quickly to consolidate under the Crown estate and the Duchy of Lancaster immediately following his mother's passing. And what those diligent lawyers reportedly found buried in the paperwork has sent genuine, undeniable shockwaves right through the core of the ancient institution. You see, The Dukedom of Edinburgh has one of the absolute most fascinating and legally tangled histories in the entire rigid structure of British peerage law. The title has been created, lapsed, and recreated multiple times over the long centuries, most recently reconstituted back in 1947, when King George VI deliberately granted the title to the young Philip Mountbatten on the very eve of his historic marriage to Princess Elizabeth. Now, this was absolutely not a casual, throwaway gesture. The letters patent establishing that specific dukedom were carefully constructed, heavy-duty legal instruments drawn up with the full, terrifying weight of top-tier royal legal counsel behind them. They were specifically written to last, written to mean something tangible, and written to bind future generations. When Prince Philip sadly passed away in April of 2021, the dukedom technically fell into a state of legal obedience, because by strict convention, titles held by the sovereign's consort do not simply automatically pass to the next generation the way a standard hereditary peerage normally would. Instead, they technically revert directly back to the crown to be regranted entirely at the reigning monarch's personal discretion. And that is exactly what Queen Elizabeth carefully chose to do. Upon her beloved husband's death, she deliberately held the Edinburgh title in obedience, reportedly with the fully expressed, private but widely known intention of one day officially bestowing it upon her youngest, most loyal son, Edward. This was an open secret within elite royal circles. It was extensively reported in the British press. It was universally understood to be a simple matter of when, and certainly not if. And then, during her momentous Platinum Jubilee in 2022, Queen Elizabeth officially made it a reality. Edward and Sophie were formally styled as the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, which was a deeply personal, highly emotional act from a powerful mother, honoring both her late husband's enduring memory and the one son she inherently trusted most to carry that heavy legacy forward. But this exact moment is where the standard royal fairy tale abruptly ends, and the brutal, unforgiving reality of high-stakes legal complexity begins to crystallize into something genuinely extraordinary. Because attached directly to the Dukedom of Edinburgh, not as a vague emotional sentiment, but as a matter of hard, documented, legally binding record, are massive provisions relating to specific property interests, highly lucrative historical annuities, and sprawling estate-related entitlements. These critical financial anchors were explicitly codified in the original 1947 letters patent and significantly reinforced in subsequent, highly confidential documents signed during Prince Philip's long tenure as Duke. These are absolutely not vague suggestions open to casual royal interpretation. According to the incredibly detailed legal analysis Edward's team has now reportedly conducted, these are strict, binding provisions that, under certain highly specific readings of English property law and the ancient law of royal grants, completely survive the transition of the title. They legally attach to whoever holds the dukedom next, which is now Edward. And King Charles, in the chaotic, heavily transitional months immediately following the beloved Queen's death, reportedly acted on a series of sweeping assumptions about those exact estates and financial interests that Edward's formidable lawyers now say were, at an absolute minimum, legally premature and potentially entirely unlawful. So what exactly is the legal bombshell here? When Queen Elizabeth died, two of the absolute most storied, historically significant properties in the entire royal portfolio, the massive Balmoral estate located in the breathtaking Scottish Highlands and the sprawling Sandringham house nestled in Norfolk, did not automatically pass in the simple, straightforward way most casual observers naturally assumed. Unlike the iconic Buckingham Palace and the historic Windsor Castle, which are technically crown properties held by the monarch in right of the crown, Balmoral and Sandringham are totally different beasts. They are entirely private properties. Balmoral was originally purchased outright by Prince Albert way back in 1852 using his own private funds. Sandringham was subsequently acquired by Edward VII. They have been held exclusively as strictly private estates by the sovereign ever since those historic transactions. Because they are fundamentally private property, they fall under a totally, entirely different set of rigid legal rules than standard crown estate assets. They can be legally bequeathed to individuals. They can be financially encumbered. And crucially for this massive emerging scandal, they can be heavily subject to documented, airtight provisions and financial charges that legally survive the transfer of ownership from one specific owner to the next. Now, Queen Elizabeth's final will is famously sealed away in a vault, as is the standard, highly secretive protocol for senior members of the royal family. Her specific testamentary wishes are completely hidden from the public eye, but the myriad of surrounding documents, the complex trust deeds, the elaborate estate planning instruments, and the certain financial provisions relating directly to the granting of the Edinburgh title are absolutely not entirely invisible to rigorous legal scrutiny. And what Edward's lawyers have reportedly managed to identify within those deeply buried associated instruments are crystal-clear provisions granting the Duke of Edinburgh, whoever actively holds that specific title, undeniable, specific financial entitlements relating to the actual use, the generated income, and in at least one shocking documented case, a partial reversionary interest in certain massive estate properties. In simple, plain English, when Queen Elizabeth formally created the new Dukedom of Edinburgh for her youngest son Edward, she appears to have deliberately, permanently attached massive legal entitlements to that title, heavily complicating Charles's ability to simply absorb the wealth without first formally acknowledging Edward's legally documented, unshakable stake. This is not petty family jealousy dressed up in fancy legal language to score cheap points in the tabloids. This is hardcore property law, ironclad letters patent, and provisions written by some of the most brilliant legal minds of the 20th century, who had absolutely every reason to believe those specific provisions would be honored, because they were explicitly written to bind whoever came after, regardless of their royal rank. Now, here is where the entire situation becomes even more explosive, because King Charles has reportedly made significant, sweeping, highly unilateral decisions about the massive disposition of these royal estates in the critical period between September 2022 and early 2024. We are talking about the rapid consolidation of highly lucrative income streams under the umbrella of the Duchy of Lancaster. We are talking about sweeping, structural changes to the overall management hierarchy of Sandringham. We are talking about massive, long-term decisions regarding Balmoral's future estate plan. And crucially, these were decisions allegedly made, according to those highly familiar with Edward's emerging legal position, without adequately or properly accounting for the massive financial entitlements that now legally vest in Edward as the current Duke of Edinburgh. In short, the new king allegedly moved vast sums of money around without bothering to ask the right legal questions first. Edward's lawyers have now reportedly confirmed, formally and in writing, that those specific entitlements are entirely real, they are heavily documented, and they are completely, legally defensible in a court of law. The palace officially received that highly sensitive legal confirmation, and by absolutely all available internal evidence, the palace did not take the news well at all. When a massive, institutional-shaking story like this begins to slowly move, and within elite royal and legal circles, let me tell you, this specific story has been moving quietly for many months. The palace typically relies on a very specific, well-worn crisis playbook. Step 1 is always to simply say nothing. They let the matter remain in the shadowy realm of legal whisper, hoping it proves far too complex for casual observers to follow and far too institutional for the rabid tabloids to fully crack. The palace has successfully managed far larger, far more damaging scandals simply through the sheer power of complete silence. No comment, no denial, no confirmation. They simply wait it out, and often, the public's notoriously short attention span means the story just fades away into the ether. But this particular story has absolutely not faded. Step 2 involves quiet, intense negotiation. Back-channel, highly confidential discussions between the powerful representatives of King Charles and the determined legal team of Prince Edward have reportedly been ongoing for some time now. Let me be clear, these are not warm, fuzzy family conversations over afternoon tea. These are deadly serious, incredibly careful, highly combative lawyerly exchanges about vast sums of money, undeniable historical entitlement, and the strict legal meaning of documents that were written in an entirely different era, but that remain very much in full legal force today.